Hey everyone. Have you ever been listening to someone speaking English, maybe? An actor in a movie, or a podcast host, maybe just a friend you really admire, and you just find yourself totally captivated by how smooth they sound,
Mhm.
how effortless, well, just natural it all seems. And have you ever felt that little pang, wanting to capture some of that same rhythm, that flow in your own English?
Oh, absolutely. That feeling is, I think, incredibly common for language learners everywhere. It
Yeah.
really gets at something deeper than just, say, having a big vocabulary or nailing every grammar rule,
Right.
sounding natural. It's more about the authentic cadence, the rhythm, the stress patterns, um, even the subtle ways sounds link up or change in real, actual speech. It's the living language,
Yeah.
not just what's on the page.
Yeah, the living language. I like that.
And getting a handle on that is such a key step towards feeling genuinely comfortable and, well, confident when you speak.
Definitely. And for this deep dive, we've been digging into some really fascinating source material that tackles this exact challenge, like head on.
Yeah, it lays out a kind of roadmap.
Exactly. It's basically a guide drawing lessons from how native speakers actually talk, and it's designed to help you bridge that gap, the gap between just speaking correct English and speaking really natural sounding English.
Hmm.
And what I found particularly powerful and encouraging from our source material is its core message.
Hmm.
You don't necessarily need to pack up your life and move across the world to achieve this.
That's a big one. The idea that you can bring the immersion to you.
Right. The right techniques, the right approach can bring that kind of immersive learning experience right to you, wherever you happen to be.
Yeah, that's such an encouraging starting point in the source material we looked at. It kind of reframes immersion. Living abroad gives you constant exposure. Sure, that's undeniable.
Of course.
But the material argues that really intentional practice, using authentic stuff, movies, podcasts, real conversations, can replicate a lot of those benefits. The goal, as the source highlights it, is really specific. It's about systematically training your ear, training it to really perceive all those subtle details of native speech.
Oh, okay.
And at the same time, training your mouth, your voice, your whole articulatory system to actually produce them. So it's both sides of the coin.
Listening and speaking. Makes sense.
Exactly. It's a dual challenge.
So, what kind of path does our source material lay out for us in this deep dive then? Where are we heading?
We're going to start by unpacking what the source tells us about how to listen effectively. Because apparently it's more than just, letting the sound wash over you.
Right. Active listening or observing, as the source puts it.
Precisely. They will dive into a technique, one the source really champions, for actually copying those natural sounds and rhythms. It sounds simple, but it seems incredibly powerful.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What else?
We'll also look at building up your collection of real-life phrases, the kinds of expressions native speakers actually use day to day, which adds that layer of authenticity.
Getting beyond textbook phrases.
Ooh.
Good.
Definitely. And importantly, we'll spend some time on the common mistakes, the pitfalls the source warns learners about when they're trying to sound natural but might actually be going off track.
Oh, that's crucial, knowing what not to do.
Exactly. And finally, we'll touch on something a bit broader, how speaking style, according to the source, connects with culture and how people might perceive you.
Interesting, like confidence or friendliness.
Things like that. And we'll wrap it all up by giving you a very practical challenge, straight from the source's recommendations, so you can start putting all this into action immediately.
Fantastic. Okay, it really sounds like it's time to move beyond just passive listening and start, well, analyzing, copying, and building that natural flow ourselves. Let's unpack this source material.
Let's dive in.
Okay, so let's start at the foundation. The absolute first thing our source material emphasizes is this idea about changing how we listen. It draws a really important distinction, doesn't it? It says, don't just hear English, actively observe it.
Exactly. Observe. It's a great word choice.
What does the source really mean by that shift from just listening to observing? What are we looking for?
It means consciously tuning your ear to pick up on the details that go beyond just the individual words and their dictionary definitions. You start paying attention to things like the tone of voice someone uses,
Okay.
the pitch variations. Does their voice go up or down? Where does the stress fall? Not just on syllables within a word, but on whole words within a sentence. What's the overall rhythm, the beat of their speech?
The music of it, almost.
Yes, precisely. And crucially, as the source really stresses, paying close attention to how words connect and blend together, because that's where things often diverge significantly from the written form.
Ah, connected speech, right? That's that thing where native speakers often sound really fast or like they're mushing words together.
That's exactly it. And the source emphasizes this because native fluent speech is very rarely just a neat string of perfectly pronounced separate words. Like, I am going to the store.
Right, nobody talks like that normally.
Almost never in casual conversation. Instead, words merge. Sounds at the end of one word can change or even disappear completely when they meet the beginning of the next word. Or new sounds can appear at the boundary. That's connected speech.
And why is noticing that so vital, according to the source?
Well, it's maybe the single biggest reason why native speakers can sometimes sound incredibly fast or difficult to understand if you're only listening for those perfectly separated dictionary words.
Because the sounds you expect aren't quite there.
Exactly. If your brain is listening for, what are you? And the person actually says something that sounds more like, whatcha? Your brain might stumble. It can't find the clear word boundaries it's expecting in the actual sound stream.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. The source gives some really classic examples to make this concrete, doesn't it? Let's take the first one. What are you doing?
Hmm? Said slowly, word by word, it's clear. But yeah, sounds totally unnatural.
Right.
How does the source show this sentence morphing in everyday casual speech? The source highlights that very common transformation into what you doing. And it's worth really dissecting that transformation because it shows several typical connected speech processes happening at once.
Okay, break it down for us. What are you becomes whatcha.
So first, think about the T sound at the end of what. Before a vowel sound like the A and R, that often changes. In American English particularly, it can become a flap sound, almost like a quick D.
Okay.
Then RU often gets heavily reduced. R might become just sh or even just a schwa sound. And U often reduces to J. So you get something like lucha, J day.
Right.
But it can reduce even further. The T from what and the J from U can actually combine through a process called palatalization, creating a P sound.
Ah, so that's where the cha comes from.
Exactly. What plus U with R reduced in between squishes together into which. And then the source points out doing very commonly drops that final ingy sound, especially in informal speech, becoming do and D zone.
Wow. So what are you doing? What are you doing? That's about what you're doing. Weishen. That is a huge difference from just reading the words.
It really is, and it shows multiple things happening. Sound change, the T becoming prickin', reduction, linking, and sound dropping, the final.
So why does this happen? The source mentions this. Is it just people being lazy or sloppy with their speech?
No, not at all, and the source is quite clear on this. It's not about laziness. It's really about phonetic efficiency and maintaining a smooth flow. It's simply physically easier and quicker for our mouths, tongue, lips, jaw to move smoothly between sounds without harsh stops between every single word.
Try saying it the slow way versus the fast way.
Exactly. Say what, full stop, are, full stop, you, full stop, doing, full stop. Feel all those stops and starts.
Yeah, it feels clunky.
Now try letting it flow. What you doing? See how much smoother the movement is? Your articulators are taking shortcuts, essentially, to make the transitions easier. This efficiency allows for that smoother, faster pace that we associate with fluency.
And the source emphasizes that learning to hear what you're doing is just as crucial for understanding native speakers as it might be for sounding more natural yourself, right?
Absolutely critical. Because if you're mentally waiting to hear the full, what are you doing, you might completely miss the meaning when someone says, what you doing, naturally. You have to train your ear to recognize these common reduced forms.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. The source gives another really common one. I don't know. How does that often get reduced in natural speech?
That one very frequently becomes, I don't know. Or sometimes even faster, like, I know.
I don't know.
Ugh.
Okay, what's happening there?
Well, the source points out the reduction of don't know. First, that final T sound in don't is almost always dropped or unreleased when it comes before a consonant sound, like the N in no. You don't typically hear a sharp T there.
Right, you don't say don't know.
Exactly. It becomes more like don't know. Then, the vowel sound in don't might reduce towards a schwa in very fast speech, making it sound like Dion, and no might stay relatively clear, or also get reduced a bit. Put it together, and you get Dion,
I don't know. Yeah, you hear that all the time.
constantly. And again, try saying, I don't know, with a very clear released final T on don't versus, I don't know, The latter just flows much more easily off the tongue. It's smoother.
These specific examples from the source, "What you doing? I don't know," are just brilliant because they immediately show how significant these sound changes are in completely normal, everyday English. It's not some obscure feature, it's happening constantly.
Precisely. And the source's main point here is that once you become consciously aware of this phenomenon, once you start observing for it, not just passively listening, you'll begin to notice it everywhere.
Like a pattern recognition thing.
Exactly. You'll start hearing how words link together, like cup of tea sounding like cup of tea. You'll hear sounds disappearing, like the D in and often drops, rock and roll. You'll hear syllables reducing, especially unstressed ones. Your ability to understand natural, fast-paced conversations, movies, podcasts, it can improve dramatically just by training your ear to expect and recognize these common features of connected speech. It's like suddenly seeing a hidden pattern that was always there.
So the takeaway from this first core strategy in the source is really transform your listening into an active analytical process. Become a kind of sound detective.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
Pay attention not just to the words themselves, but to their actual shape in spoken language, the rhythm, the melody, how they connect. When you listen next, consciously try to notice how someone says going to. Is it goda? Or want to? Is it wanna? Or kinda? Is it kinda? The source suggests it's in tuning into these tiny, pervasive details that the foundation for sounding natural is built.
Precisely. And mastering this kind of focused observational listening is exactly what prepares you for the next step the source recommends, active practice. It makes that practice much more effective.
Which brings us neatly to the second major strategy highlighted in the source, active practice using a technique called shadowing. The source presents this as a really potent tool for actually internalizing those sounds and rhythms we've just been talking about observing.
Yes, shadowing. It's essentially a form of immediate mimicry. You listen to a native speaker, and you try to speak at the same time as them, maybe trailing just a tiny fraction of a second behind, like a shadow.
So it's not just listening and then repeating after they stop.
No, the key difference is the simultaneity. You're trying to synchronize your voice with theirs in real time as closely as you possibly can.
Okay, that sounds challenging. How does the source recommend approaching this? It breaks it down into steps, right?
It does, to make it more manageable. Step one is to choose your material, but keep it short.
Short. Why short? What kind of material?
The source suggests anything authentic. A scene from a TV show or movie, a short clip from a podcast you like, a YouTube video, maybe even a brief voice message if you have one. And the reason for starting short, like maybe just one sentence or 15-30 seconds of audio, is crucial.
Why?
Because you're trying to replicate incredibly fine details. The exact pitch changes, the precise rhythm, the stress, the way the sounds link or reduce. Trying to maintain that intense level of focus and mimicry for, say, 5 minutes straight would be completely overwhelming and exhausting when you're starting out.
Right, you'd lose concentration.
Exactly. By focusing on just one short chunk, you can really dedicate your full attention to capturing those nuances. It allows for deep, concentrated practice on a small, digestible piece before you try to tackle longer stretches.
Quality over quantity, especially at the beginning.
Makes perfect sense. Okay, so choose a short clip, then step two, according to the source.
Step 2 is to listen to just one sentence from your clip, then pause the audio, and then try to repeat that sentence exactly as you heard it. The source really emphasizes that word exactly. What are we aiming for in that paused repetition? What does exactly mean here?
In this pause and repeat step, you're basically checking your understanding and making your first conscious attempt at production before you try the simultaneous shadowing. You're aiming to match everything you observed. The speed of the sentence, the intonation contour, like the melody, did it go up or down at the end? Where did the main stress fall?
Okay.
And yes, crucially, those connected speech features we discussed. If a speaker linked two words, you try to link them. If they reduced a vowel or dropped a sound, you try to replicate that reduction or omission. This step is like studying the musical score of that sentence before you try to play along with the orchestra. It helps you pinpoint the specific sounds and rhythms you need to target in the next phase.
Got it. Listen, pause, repeat exactly, focusing on all those details. Then comes step 3, which is the actual shadowing part.
Yes, step 3 is the core technique. You play that same sentence or short clip again, but this time you speak along with the native speaker simultaneously. You're trying to talk right on top of their voice or just milliseconds behind.
Okay, why is speaking at the same time so important? How's that different from just listening and repeating after? What's the magic there?
This is where the real power of shadowing lies, according to the source. And it uses a really effective analogy to explain why. Shadowing is like physical training at the gym.
The gym analogy. I remember reading that. So it's exercise for your mouth.
Precisely. Learning to produce the sounds, rhythms, and intonation of natural English isn't just a mental exercise of knowing the rules. It is fundamentally a physical skill. Your mouth, your tongue, your lips, your jaw, your vocal cords, these are all muscles and structures.
Right.
And they need to be trained to move in specific, coordinated, and often new ways to produce sounds and sequences of sounds that might not exist in your native language. Or maybe just to produce familiar sounds, but with a different timing, rhythm, or placement.
So shadowing forces those muscles to work in the right way.
Exactly. When you shadow, you are actively forcing your entire articulatory system, all those mouth parts, to keep up with the speed, the flow, and the intricate patterns of a native speaker in real time. You are quite literally building muscle memory for specific sound sequences, for rhythm patterns, for intonation contours.
Okay, muscle memory. That makes sense.
And it's doing something else too.
That's it.
It's simultaneously training your ear and your voice in a tight feedback loop. Your ear hears the target sound just milliseconds before your own voice attempts to produce it.
Ah, so you can compare immediately.
Instantly, you hear the slight difference between their sound and your attempt, and you can try to adjust on the fly in the very next repetition. It's this constant, active, real-time comparison combined with the physical attempt to replicate that makes shadowing uniquely effective. It improves your pronunciation, your rhythm, and your intonation all at the same time because you're physically performing the language with the model speaker.
That's a powerful combination. The source gives that great, memorable example from pop culture to illustrate this. Ross from Friends and his famous line.
We were on a break, yes.
Describe how you'd actually apply shadowing to that specific line. What would you be focusing on?
Well, anyone who's seen that episode knows that line isn't just about the words. It's delivered with a very specific performance, often high-pitched, definitely exasperated, maybe a bit whiny or pleading, depending on the instance.
Right, it has a whole emotional package.
Exactly. So when you shadow that line, you're not just saying the words, "we were on a break." You are trying to physically reproduce that entire sonic and emotional package.
Yeah.
You're focusing on matching Ross's specific pitch contour, how his voice goes way up and then maybe down.
Okay.
You're matching his timing, the rhythm, where does he put the stress. It's usually something like, "we were on a break," with heavy stress on we and on. And you're even trying to capture that underlying emotional tone, the exasperation, the defensiveness. You're essentially trying to copy the music and the performance of the line, not just the sequence of words on a page.
And what specific language skills does practicing that kind of, well, performance help you develop? According to the source's logic, why is copying that emotional delivery useful?
It directly trains your ability to use intonation and stress to convey meaning and emotion, which is absolutely critical in English. English relies heavily on these features. It's not a monotone language at all.
Right.
Pitch changes and stress placement are used constantly to signal things like questions versus statements, to put emphasis on certain information, to convey emotions like surprise, sarcasm, enthusiasm, doubt, even to signal if you've finished your thought or if there's more coming.
So practicing the "we're on a break" line helps you internalize that specific kind of exasperated contour.
Exactly. The source implies that by practicing that specific intonation pattern, that rise and fall, that placement of stress, you internalize it. You learn how English speakers use those acoustic features to signal that particular feeling. And then you can start applying that learning consciously or subconsciously to other situations where you want to convey similar emphasis or emotion. It teaches you, for instance, that saying, "I can't believe it," with a rising stress tone sounds genuinely surprised, while saying it flatly sounds unimpressed. Shadowing helps make using these expressive intonation patterns more automatic and natural.
So shadowing really emerges from the source material as this very practical, very physical technique. It's about training the muscles in the ear together to actually produce the sounds and rhythms that make English sound fluid and natural. It bridges that gap between intellectually knowing how something should sound and physically being able to make it sound that way.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Observation, that first step, gives you the blueprint, the target sound. Shadowing is how you actually build the structure by physically practicing the necessary movements over and over again. It's the active ingredient.
Okay, so we're observing closely, listening for the links, the rhythm, the music. We're actively copying, using shadowing, getting those mouth muscles warmed up and coordinated. What's the next crucial piece of this puzzle that the source material brings in?
The source then shifts focus a bit towards vocabulary, but specifically towards building your repertoire of natural, everyday expressions and phrases.
Ah, okay. Not just individual words, but chunks of language.
Exactly. The point the source makes is that native speakers constantly rely on certain common phrases, idioms, collocations, uh, conversational fillers, transition words, ways of saying things that often aren't the most literal or grammatically simple option, but they are the conventional way, the
Yeah.
way people actually talk. And learning and, importantly, using these makes your English sound much less.
Well, the source uses the word robotic, less like something constructed word by word from a dictionary or a grammar textbook, and more like, a real person talking.
Yeah, moving beyond just being technically correct to sounding genuinely authentic in a conversation, the source gives some really good examples here to illustrate this. Let's look at ways to say, I agree. What are some of the more natural alternatives the source lists?
Okay, so instead of just defaulting to the slightly formal, I agree all the time, the source suggests listening for and trying out phrases like, totally, exactly, I couldn't agree more, and sometimes just a simple affirming, yeah, or right, or
Totally feels very casual. Are these all completely interchangeable, or do they have slightly different flavors?
that's a key point. The source implies you need to learn through observation. They aren't exactly the same. Totally. It's definitely informal, very common, especially in American English, and it signals complete, often enthusiastic agreement. Like, yes, 100% what you said is spot on.
Okay, what about exactly? Is used more when someone says something that perfectly captures your own thought or feeling. You're affirming the precision of their statement. It's like saying, yes, that's precisely the point I was thinking.
Got it. And I couldn't agree more.
That one's a bit stronger, maybe slightly more formal than totally, but still very common in many contexts. It emphasizes the degree of your agreement. You agree so strongly, it feels impossible to agree any further. It's quite versatile.
So, learning these different options, as the source suggests, gives you a kind of palette, different ways to express agreement depending on the situation and how strongly you feel.
Precisely. You have more tools in your conversational toolkit. It makes your responses more nuanced and natural.
That's really useful. It's not just about synonyms, but about understanding the function and the feel of different phrases. The source also gives alternatives for, I don't know, right? What were those?
Yeah, for, I don't know, the source lists common alternatives like, I have no idea.
Eh.
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Yeah.
The very informal, beats me.
Beats me. That one sounds quite different. How would you know when to use that one versus, say, I have no idea? What's the difference in feel?
That's a great question about context. I have no idea. It's probably the most common and generally applicable alternative. You can use it in lots of situations, fairly neutral.
Okay.
I'm not sure, to be honest, adds a layer. It sounds maybe a bit more considerate, perhaps a little more polite. It suggests you've maybe thought about it, but genuinely don't have the answer, or you want to signal some uncertainty while being truthful. The to be honest part adds that sincerity.
Right. And beats me.
Beats me
Yeah.
is definitely at the informal end of the spectrum. You typically use it with friends, peers, in very relaxed settings. It often carries a connotation that the question is puzzling, maybe a bit baffling, and you're completely stumped.
Yeah.
There can be a slight shrug-like feeling to it, maybe even a hint of who knows, or it's a mystery to me.
So you probably wouldn't use beats me in a job interview.
Definitely not. That would sound far too casual and possibly dismissive. Whereas I'm not sure, or perhaps even I have no idea, might be perfectly acceptable depending on the question and the context. It highlights how crucial understanding the context and register of these phrases is.
These examples really drive home the source's point.
Yeah.
Actively collecting these natural alternatives, noticing how and when native speakers use them, and then trying them out yourself, that's what helps your English sound much more authentic. It shows you're tapping into the language as it's actually spoken, not just the formal textbook version.
Exactly. It's about absorbing the real flavor, the idiomatic quality of everyday conversation. And the source implies you gather these best not just from lists, but by actively noticing them when you're listening in those movies, podcasts, conversations, and making a mental note or even a physical note to try them out later.
So, okay, we've covered the importance of observing how things are said, practicing copying sounds and rhythms with shadowing, and building our toolkit of natural phrases. The source material also spends some important time warning us about common mistakes. Things learners often do when they're trying to sound more native, but that can actually backfire.
Yes, understanding these potential traps is just as crucial as learning the positive techniques. Avoiding these pitfalls helps you focus your practice effectively and prevents you from developing habits that might actually make you sound less natural, ironically.
Okay, let's unpack those pitfalls. What's the first common mistake the source highlights?
The first big one the source points out is trying to speak too fast. There seems to be this common misconception among learners that speed equals fluency. So people often try to consciously accelerate their speaking rate before they've really mastered the underlying pronunciation, rhythm, and linking.
And what's the result of forcing speed without having that solid foundation, according to the source?
The result is often that you sound rushed, unclear, maybe even stumbling over words. Your pronunciation can suffer, and the overall effect can be quite jarring or difficult for the listener to follow. Instead of sounding fluent, you might just sound messy or anxious.
The speed isn't the primary goal.
Not initially, no. The source emphasizes that native speakers often sound fast, not as just because they're physically talking at maximum speed, but because the efficiency of their speech. The smooth transitions, the connected speech, the natural rhythm and stress patterns we've been discussing. Those elements create the perception of speed and fluency.
Ah, it's the smoothness that counts more than raw velocity.
Exactly. Trying to force speed before you have that underlying smoothness and control can actually make you sound less fluent, not more. The core advice from the source is to prioritize clear, smooth speech with a natural rhythm first. Speed will tend to increase more organically as your comfort, confidence, and control improve with practice. Don't chase speed for speed's sake.
That's a really important distinction. Focus on the rhythm and clarity, and let speed come naturally. Okay, what's another common pitfall the source warns against?
Another major one is overusing slang, or using it inappropriately. The source acknowledges that slang is definitely a part of natural living language, and learning some can be fun.
What?
But slang is highly, highly dependent on context. It changes rapidly, it varies hugely between different age groups, social circles, and even geographical regions.
Yeah.
And using it incorrectly can make you sound quite unnatural.
The source gives that specific example, doesn't it? Something like, yo, bro, that's lit.
Yes, exactly. That example perfectly captures the potential problem. Now, phrases like that's lit mean something like excellent or exciting, and terms like bro, they absolutely are used by some native speakers in certain contexts.
Right.
But imagine dropping yo bro, that's lit into a formal business presentation, or saying it to your university professor, or even just trying to string together 5 or 6 different slang terms from different groups into one sentence. It sounds forced, out of place, maybe even a bit cringy.
So it's not enough just to know what the slang word means. You have to know its social address, essentially.
Precisely. You need to understand when it's appropriate, where it's appropriate, and with whom it's appropriate. The source implicitly warns that throwing slang around incorrectly is like wearing, I don't know, beach wear to a formal wedding. It signals that you don't fully grasp the social nuances and conventions of that situation.
So the advice would be to be cautious with slang.
Yes, be observant and cautious. Learn slang primarily by noticing how native speakers use it naturally in specific informal contexts. Listen for who uses it, when, and how often. And then maybe gradually try incorporating a term here or there when it feels genuinely appropriate and comfortable for you in a similar context. Don't just memorize a list of trendy slang and try to sprinkle it everywhere.
Okay, good advice. Avoid forcing speed. Be very mindful of slang context. What's the third critical mistake the source flags?
This one is perhaps the most fundamental, and it relates back to the physical nature of speaking we discussed with shadowing. The mistake is simply not practicing speaking out loud enough.
Relying too much on passive learning.
Exactly. The source stresses that many learners, understandably, spend a lot of time on input, listening to podcasts, watching movies, reading articles. And that input is absolutely essential. You need it.
But
They often neglect the output. They don't spend enough time actually producing the language themselves, speaking it out loud.
and why is that spoken practice completely non-negotiable if your goal is to sound more natural?
Because, as the source implies through its emphasis on techniques like shadowing, speaking is a physical motor skill. Listening trains your brain and your ear to recognize the sounds, the patterns, the rhythms. It builds your comprehension.
Right.
But listening alone doesn't automatically train the complex coordination of muscles in your mouth, tongue, lips, jaw, and larynx needed to produce those sounds accurately, smoothly, and with the correct timing and intonation. You can understand perfectly how a sound should be made or how a sentence should flow, but if you haven't physically practiced making your mouth form those shapes and move between them fluidly.
You won't be able to do it reliably when you try to speak.
Exactly. Your articulators need the practice, the repetition, to become agile and automatic in producing the sounds and rhythms of English. If you only focus on input, your passive understanding might soar, but your active speaking ability, especially your pronunciation, fluency, and naturalness, will likely hit a plateau. The source is clear. You absolutely must practice speaking out loud regularly to improve how you sound.
Okay, so let's quickly recap these key pitfalls highlighted by the source. Number 1, don't chase raw speed. Focus on clarity, smoothness, and rhythm first. Number 2, use slang very cautiously, paying close attention to social context and appropriateness. And number 3, make speaking out loud actually producing the language a regular, essential part of your learning routine. Don't just be a passive consumer.
Right. Avoiding these common traps helps you channel your energy into the constructive techniques, like observation and shadowing, that the source suggests will genuinely lead to more natural-sounding English.
Now, the source material then takes a slight turn, expanding beyond just the mechanics of sound and word choice. It touches on something a bit deeper. How our speaking style is actually perceived in English-speaking cultures, how it connects to impressions like confidence or friendliness. This brings in a fascinating cultural layer.
Yes, this is a really insightful section in the material. It makes the point that the way you sound isn't just about conveying information clearly, it's also constantly sending social and emotional signals.
How so?
Well, as the source highlights, subtle things like your tone of voice, your intonation patterns, the rhythm of your speech, these elements significantly influence how native speakers perceive you as a person. They can impact whether you come across as, say, confident or hesitant, engaged or bored, friendly or perhaps abrupt, approachable, or distant.
It's amazing how much is communicated beyond the literal words. How does something like intonation specifically carry that kind of social weight? The source uses that simple "how are you" example to demonstrate this, doesn't it?
It does, and it's a perfect illustration. Imagine saying the words, "How are you?"
Yeah.
but with a completely flat, level, monotone delivery, like a robot stating the words.
Okay.
The words are correct, the grammar is perfect, but what social message does that flat tone send? In many English-speaking contexts, it could easily sound uninterested, detached, maybe even cold or unwelcoming. It doesn't invite connection.
Right. It feels like you're just going through the motions.
Exactly. Now contrast that, as the source suggests, with saying, "How are you?" with a generally friendly tone and typically a slight rising intonation at the very end. Demonstrates a rising tone. "How are you?" That upward curve in pitch at the end.
What does that signal?
It conventionally signals genuine interest, warmth, openness. It functions as a friendly invitation to respond and engage in conversation. It's the standard, expected way to ask that question if you want to initiate a positive interaction. The melody completely changes the social meaning.
It really is incredible how just the music of the sentence transforms the entire social message being sent.
It truly is. And intonation is packed with this kind of meaning in English. A falling tone at the end usually signals completion or certainty. "I'm going home." A rising tone often signals a question, "Are you ready?" But it can also signal uncertainty, incompletion, or surprise. "You won."
Mm-hmm.
And where you put the main stress in a sentence changes the focus. "I didn't say that," implies someone else did. "I didn't say that," implies maybe I wrote it or thought it.
Yeah.
As the source implies, becoming aware of these common intonation patterns and practicing using them consciously is vital. Not just for sounding more native, but for navigating social interactions effectively and avoiding unintentional misunderstandings about your attitude or intentions.
Yeah, you might think you're being neutral, but a flat intonation could be interpreted as rude or bored.
Precisely. Misusing intonation can sometimes send social signals you absolutely don't intend.
The source also specifically calls out reductions again here. Things like going to becoming gonna and want to becoming wanna, mentioning they're particularly common in, say, casual American English. How do these fit into this bigger picture of sounding natural and fitting into the culture of spoken English?
These reductions, and many others like kinder for kind of or shoulda for should have, are characteristic markers of informal connected speech. The source suggests learning to recognize them is important for really two key reasons that tie into both understanding and sounding natural.
Okay, what are those two reasons?
First, recognition is crucial for comprehension. Native speakers use forms like gonna and wanna constantly in everyday informal conversation. If your ear isn't tuned to recognize them, you might simply misunderstand what's being said Or at least it might take your brain an extra fraction of a second to process it, which can disrupt the flow of listening.
Right, you might be listening for going to and just miss the gonna.
Exactly. So learning to hear them helps you keep up. Second, from the production side, choosing to use these reductions yourself appropriately in informal contexts can help your own speech sound more relaxed, more fluent, more integrated into that casual conversational style. It makes you sound less like you're reading from a formal script and more like you're participating naturally in the flow.
So understanding and potentially using these reductions isn't just about mimicking, it's partly about participating in the expected rhythm and level of formality of casual chat.
Yes, exactly. They are a part of the sonic landscape of informal spoken English. They signal a certain degree of casualness and contribute to the overall smooth flow that marks native-like fluency in those contexts. Of course, as the source implies, navigating when it's appropriate to use them is part of the learning curve. You probably wouldn't use gonna in a very formal speech,
Right.
but it's perfectly natural, even expected, in a relaxed chat with friends or colleagues.
Okay, so bringing together these points on cultural and linguistic nuance from the source. It's vital to pay close attention to tone, rhythm, and especially intonation, because they carry so much social meaning about your attitude and intentions. Practicing using intonation consciously is key, and learning to recognize and perhaps cautiously use common reductions like gonna and wanna helps with both understanding native speakers and sounding more natural in informal settings yourself. It's really about grasping those layers of communication that go beyond just the dictionary definitions of the words.
It's exactly that. It's moving beyond purely linguistic correctness, just
Yeah.
getting the grammar right towards what linguists call sociolinguistic confidence, which is using language in a way that's not just correct, but also feels natural, appropriate, and effective within different social situations and cultural contexts.
Wow. This has been a really comprehensive deep dive, pulling out all these practical strategies and insights directly from the source material on how to approach learning from native speakers. We've really covered a lot of ground.
We have.
We started with that crucial idea of observing speech, not just hearing it, tuning into connected speech, those reductions, the rhythm, the tone.
The foundation.
Then we explored the shadowing technique, framing it as essential physical training for your voice and ear, building that muscle memory.
The active practice component.
We looked at the value of deliberately building your vocabulary of natural, real-life conversational phrases and alternatives, moving beyond textbook language.
Getting the authentic vocabulary.
And we spent important time on those common pitfalls the source warns about, like chasing speed too early, misusing slang out of context, or neglecting actual speaking practice.
Knowing what to avoid.
And finally, we touched on how your speaking style, through things like intonation and reductions, influences social perception and connects to cultural norms.
Right, the sociolinguistic layer. It really is a multifaceted approach presented in the source. It requires training your ear, training your voice, making conscious choices about authentic language.
Yeah, it involves deliberate practice across listening, speaking, and vocabulary, all aimed at capturing the nuances of natural communication.
Exactly.
Now, the great thing is, the source material doesn't just leave you with all this information. It actually gives you a very concrete challenge, a way to put these ideas into action right away, which is often the hardest part, right? Translating the learning into doing.
Definitely. The practical application.
So here is your challenge, drawn straight from the source's recommendations, directly for you, our listener, to try today or this week.
Okay, step 1. Find yourself a short piece of authentic English audio. Could be, like we said, a scene from a show you love, a couple of sentences from a podcast episode that caught your ear, maybe a short YouTube clip. The key is to pick something you find genuinely interesting, because that makes the practice way more engaging.
Good tip. Keep it interesting. Okay, step 2.
Step 2. From that short clip, pick out just 1 or maybe 2 sentences. Listen to them really closely, focusing on all the things we talked about: rhythm, intonation, any linking or reductions. Then pause the audio, and then shadow it. Repeat it out loud. Try your absolute best to match the speaker's speed, their melody, their rhythm, how they connect the words. Do this several times for that same short sentence. Just loop it until you feel like you're getting closer to replicating their sound and their overall feel.
Okay, focus shadowing on a very small chunk. Got it. And step 3.
Step 3 is about vocabulary activation. Try to consciously use just one new natural phrase or alternative expression that we discussed today. Maybe one of the ways to say, I agree, or I don't know, like totally, or I have no idea, or beats me if the context is right. Or perhaps another phrase you've recently noticed native speakers using. The challenge is to try and use it in a real conversation if you can. or even just practice saying it out loud in a sentence by yourself. Make a deliberate effort to produce it.
I love that. Small, manageable, concrete actions. Choose a clip, shadow a sentence repeatedly, use one new phrase. The source suggests that it's these kinds of small, consistent actions that really build momentum and turn the theory into actual skill development.
Exactly, they're the building blocks. And there's one more related point from the source that encourages a bit of self-reflection, which I think is quite useful too.
Oh yeah, what's that?
It suggests taking a moment to think about a native English speaker whose way of speaking you particularly admire. Who is it? Maybe an actor, a specific podcaster, a public speaker, maybe even just a friend or colleague. And then ask yourself, why do I like the way they sound? What specifically is it about their speech?
Ah, identifying your own target model.
Precisely. Is it their clear pronunciation, their confident intonation, the way they use humor, their smooth rhythm, maybe their friendly tone? Identifying what exactly you admire in their speech can give you a more specific target for your own observation and practice. You can start listening for those specific qualities when you hear them speak.
That's a fantastic tip for personalizing the process. Makes it less abstract. Reflecting on everything we've unpacked from the source material in this deep dive, it really is striking how much subtle complexity and meaning is packed into just the sound of spoken language. All these details that seem small in isolation, like whether you say going to or gonna, or exactly where you place the main stress in a sentence, or the precise melody of your voice when you ask a question.
Yeah, they all add up.
They collectively weave together this intricate tapestry that creates the impression of a natural speaker. It really drives home that mastering the language isn't just about the grammar rules and the vocabulary list. It's profoundly about internalizing the rhythm, the music, and all those rich social signals that are embedded within the flow of speech itself.
It really is a journey of discovery, isn't it? Not just discovering words, but discovering sounds, rhythms, and the cultural nuances they carry.
Absolutely. And building on those ideas from the source about perception and the impact that our speaking style has. Here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to carry forward and mull over. Think again about that natal speaker whose speaking style you admire. Is their impact on you the reason you find them engaging or persuasive or friendly based only on the words they choose? Or is it significantly shaped, maybe even more so, by how they deliver those words?
Oh, the delivery.
Their confident tone, perhaps? The warmth conveyed through their intonation? The sense of ease that comes from their natural rhythm? How might actively focusing on and practicing these often overlooked elements, using the kinds of strategies we've drawn from our source material today, how might that change not just how natural you sound when you speak English, but maybe even deepen your connection to the language and to its speakers, by allowing you to communicate more fully, more authentically, more effectively on that human-to-human level?
That's a great question to ponder. Keep observing, keep listening closely, keep practicing out loud, and keep exploring all these fascinating nuances of spoken English.
Every active step you take, every sound you consciously train your ear to hear, every single attempt you make to shadow a sentence or try out a new natural phrase, it really does move you closer to that goal of sounding truly natural and feeling genuinely confident when you speak.
Enjoy the process of learning and experimenting, and hopefully enjoy the sound of your own voice becoming clearer and more natural along the way.
Bye for now.